Amazing. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for
Hello.
being on. Can you start out by introducing yourself, however you take that today?
Absolutely. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about everything today. I'm Hema Lochan. I go by Heemz, they, them. I wear a lot of hats, but I first and foremost am an environmental justice attorney, focusing on clean energy work, and I'm also an ultramarathon runner. And yay, that's how I will introduce myself for now.
Amazing. And there's so many other layers to it, and we'll get into that. It's great. I ask every guest this. I wanted to ask you about your aha moment on climate or environment. What was your moment that you kind of realized both like we need to do something, but also this is really important to me or really important to the world? Curious about that for you.
That's such a good question because it simultaneously feels like it's ingrained, and also there's visceral moments in my brain that I can pull on. And one particular one is growing up in New York City on Lenape land, but really much in Queens where there's not a lot of natural spaces. Um, it always felt like the environment was not always at the forefront, but now as an
Mm.
adult, I'm realizing a lot of my core memories are tied to the environment. A lot of it was my mom and dad in the garden cultivating vegetables, even though we had a very small garden and very limited access to space. It's us going to the park as kids, even though we never like we would have to go a distance to even access green spaces. And I think it like as I became an adult, I was realizing that these core memories that are so beautiful also just made me realize that who has access to the environment is also a privilege, and that just like really tied in sort of the environmental justice impact of like how I do my work and like who gets to access the environment. But it really just like it's those small moments of like my I come from an immigrant background family. My parents are from Guyana. They grew up on farms. They would always talk to me about the animals that they grew up with, like running in rivers and all of those things. And I would just like look
Wow.
outside to like the concrete and I was like, what's a river? Like, it's like
What
those
is
moments
that?
of
Yeah.
deep curiosity that like really made me realize like, wow, the environment is something that is so beautiful and like seemed majestic at one point, but it is really something that we do need to take care of. And I think the other aha moment was like the first trail run I ever did was just so beautiful because I was so used to running on roads, running on tracks, and then I like ran on a trail and I don't even know how long I was on the trail for. I just never wanted to stop because I was like, this is beautiful that we get to do this. This is beautiful that I get to. It just felt like my brain was constantly taking in my surroundings, figuring out how to navigate a trail with my feet, but it was just this moment of like, wow, it's beautiful and I really want to make sure that everyone can do this in their lifetime. So, yeah.
What was that first trail? Do you remember where and when that was?
It was in Van Cortlandt in the Bronx. And it was in high school. I had joined the cross country team mostly just because I was like, I need to be active. I need to run. I need to do something. And I remember taking the train all the way up to Van Cortlandt, and then all of a sudden, from like moving from the train and buildings to this like big greenery, and I was like, "What is this? Wait, this place existed this whole time?" And then just
And
like
you can run here?
and you can run here? Like we can run here? Are we allowed here? And then yeah, just like running on it and just feeling like, whoa, there's trees, there's animals, there's sounds. I was just like it was beautiful. It was like a symphony in my brain as I was running.
I love that. Oh, and was that I in my research I've seen or read that you talk about potentially that group being one that felt more inclusive and or you saw folks that looked like you, or was that a different experience? Like was this your high school running group that felt like you? Yeah, can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that, because that's really interesting to me.
Oh, absolutely. So I went to a specific specialized high school in New York, and it is a little complex because there is still like it is somewhat still exclusionary because you have to take a test to get into it. Although I know that there's work being done now to even expand that.
That's
To
with a
be,
lot of New York high schools, though, right?
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
specific to New York
Yeah.
City,
Interesting.
but a lot of students who went to that school, it wasn't based on like your zone. It was based on just like if you could get in. Um, a lot of folks were under the poverty line, and it just like represented a lot of different diversity in New York. And my cross country team was also very diverse, and I think I found running in a place that I didn't necessarily feel out of place. I actually felt very in place with this team, and being able to explore trails with this team, with like a coach that I felt really safe and seen with, and with a team I felt really safe and seen with. It really started my running career, and this like connection to the environment on a way that really centered, inclusivity and feeling safe and seen, which as I
Wow.
transitioned out like of high school and like found my own running journey, realized that like that's not always the case in trail running. But yeah, it was a very interesting transition.
Yes, absolutely. Or running in general, but I think more so
Yeah,
trail running, absolutely. So interesting. Okay, so many questions for you, of course, always. But can you talk a little bit more about your work as an environmental lawyer? Because to me, what I want to do with this podcast is start to talk to folks, sure, like pro athletes that want to talk about climate. That is very important. I also want to talk to folks who are practitioners and subject matter experts and like work in the spaces that you work in and have that kind of common language of running or an outdoor pursuit. And so to me, like, this is again, like a little bit of an array of folks on who are both kind of professional, well, actually, no, are just professional in different ways, like a professional lawyer like you, or like someone who, maybe makes money through sport or kind of athletics and other pursuits. And there's just a ton of folks. So I would love if, before we talk about running a little bit more, if you
of
could tell me more
course.
about your job,
Of
your work.
course. I will yap away about this because I think it's so important, and I love so much what I do. Like I said, I'm an environmental justice lawyer, and I've been doing that for about 4-ish years now. And I think when we think about environmental justice, something that I like to prime it on is that it's not just the environment, it's all the things that intersect with the environment. And that includes racial justice, it includes gender justice, it includes socioeconomic justice, it includes just everything, because like that intersection is the core of how we think about all of these issues. And then at the other core is really centering who is directly impacted by environmental harms. And that is how we take on cases. That is how I look at a case, and how I look at my representation of my communities and clients on cases. What I do primarily, I started doing coal ash work, which was more national and throughout like the US, of ensuring quicker shutdown of coal plants, because unfortunately a lot of the way energy was designed back then was that we would burn a lot of coal, and then there would be a lot of really toxic residuals that would be placed near communities of color, poor communities, which just seemed deeply unfair. And ensuring that that cleanup is proper, while also ensuring more coal facilities are shut down, which we've done such a good job
Wow.
of, that I've transitioned into more clean energy work, which
Okay.
is thinking about the future and the solutions that we might look towards to, you know, as we develop, how do we get our energy in a way that doesn't really harm the environment? How do we be more sustainable in how we get our energy? And how does this energy transition make sure it does not fall on the folks who have been directly impacted and have been historically impacted, and
Right.
just making sure that those conversations are centered. So that's like a gist of what I do. It's a lot, but it's
Oh, this
definitely work that I'm very passionate about.
clearly. And we're so lucky to have you in this work and in this space. It's so cool to hear that you've transitioned to a different focus area because we've done so well on shutting coal plants down. It sounds like that's quite amazing, actually. When did that happen? Like not the sort of success benchmark necessarily, but like when did you start to transition in
Oh,
your role?
absolutely. And I have to say, and this is like something that I do center in my work as a lawyer, it is, and the legal field and in general, thinking about things as an individual win is never how I center things.
Yeah.
Anything that I do is a collective. It really is because of all of the folks who worked on coal ash cases before me and coal before me. Um, it was like decades and decades of getting
Oh,
good law like passed, and like decades and decades of getting really, good wins in the courts in different states. And I think even though I was able to work on it for a little bit, it really were the lawyers and generations and community members before me that really did the bulk of that work. But one of the cases I did get to work on in a team with my clients who were amazing. It was in Michigan, and it was like at that time the third largest coal plant, and I believe it was in a settlement in 2022 or 2021. All the years are blending, so fairly recent, but they committed to retiring that coal plant earlier than they had originally set to retire. So just like pushing these companies to retire their coal plants earlier than later, it was just like a really big win, because that means the transition away from coal and towards more clean energy resources happens sooner. And I do feel like, climate change is real. It's a real big thing happening out there, and as it's really important for us to get to solutions quicker than later, because it's not just us. And if we think about this as collective instead of individual, it's also the generations after us that are going to deal with the brunt of this as well. So, yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Gosh. And again, I'm like hearing you talk about this. I just have this. I know hope is sort of a charged word in the climate space right now, but I do have hope and appreciation for the work that you do. Okay, so I'm gonna come back to your work in a second, but I'm very curious to talk a little bit more about your running, because I feel like these two parts of your identity are so interlinked. And one thing I just wanted to say is that when we met recently through a friend of ours, which we'll get into, I just was really struck by how much you credit is probably the wrong word, but like talk about others and about your community and about, it's not me, it's these other folks who have done all this. And it's clear that you do that in your work too, which is really unbelievable, because you are doing incredible work and you're acknowledging, I know, that there's so many people around you working on that too, which is great. But I was just curious. I mean, I know this number's out of date, but I'm like 32 marathons you've run, maybe more now. I think more because you just ran New York, right?
Yeah, that was 33, okay. Which is bananas.
33. There we go. Okay. Almost an accurate number, but it's really hard to keep up because your numbers change all the time. You've run so many marathons. Tell me a little bit more about both. I'm curious about the pursuit of running and how either that you came to that or that came to you, and a little more about the community that you have around that, because as I kind of teased or mentioned, the friend that put us in touch is part of this community I know of runners for you. So was just curious if you could talk more about the pursuit, and also again something that's so important to your life, clearly community around that sport.
Oh, absolutely. Wow, what a great question.
Where do we go?
I know. Okay, I love this. I think okay, what I love about this is so many folks think running is such a solo sport because it is your two legs, right? Your two legs are running, you're running a long distance. When I started to figure out my goals in running and how I connected to running when found marathon running, it was really just because like I use it as a way to just connect with my surroundings, and just like for me it was a connection point to, oh hey, like, do you want to run together and have a conversation? Like a lot of my long runs were just like also building friendships and just like finding other people who wanted to run. And then my first marathon, which is bananas that it was I think 2015 and 2014 now.
Wow.
Yeah, but it was because I had really injured myself to the point where like I had a stress fracture, which was unfortunate, and I was out of running for maybe 6 months. And then through that moments where I was like, I couldn't really run, I just relied on community. I relied on like seeing people. I relied on having conversations and building friendships. And then as I started getting back into running, it was like every time I would go for a run, I would think of a conversation I had, and it allowed me to reflect on like the people in my life. And then just realizing that like nothing in life we ever actually do solo. Nothing in life we ever actually do by ourselves. Because like the moments where, you know, I will be very candid, even though I run a bunch, there are moments where I feel burnt out and moments where I'm like, I don't actually want to show up for this run, or I don't really want to do this race. And granted, it is okay to listen to your body and listen to like not doing races, but those are the moments where I like tap into my community and be like, hey, are you going to be there? Do you want to like go together? Do you want to do this together? And I think those are such beautiful moments. And a friend that we met in common and we have in common, shout out Amanda Stecco. Love you.
I was going to say, we need to name her. Amanda Stecco.
Hi. We met on a random ultra marathon in Colorado. Neither of us knew we were both from New York. And we just vibed. And it was just like amazing to find your people that you feel seen and safe with. Because running is such a mental sport and you do battle your own demons a lot of the times. And like, I think community is in all of those times where I felt like potentially my demons were winning, community is what pulled me out of it and kept me in running. And I think that was like, that's always something that I center in my running journey, because yes, I have run all of these, but the folks that really get me to the finish line, it's not me. It is like the people I think of on my runs, or the people who are literally out there cheering me on my runs, or the people who check in. And it's just like, and I do that for them. And it's like this thing where we all get each other to the finish line. And it's just really beautiful, because it's like you would think just like running these amount of miles feels like so unattainable, but you've realized you can go way further doing things together.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to hang that quote above on my wall. No, because it's true. I mean, yeah, this friend Stecco of ours was someone that I also met through running and through a really strong community in Washington, D.C. way back when, like actually maybe 10 years ago, which is kind of wild to admit.
Bananas.
But I think was that meeting that you had together, was that in kind of a stage race? Is that the Rocky Mountain, or there was like a mountain
the Trans Rockies? Yeah.
Trans Rockies, there we go. Thank you. I was like, what's the name of that? And that I also remember talking to a few folks about being like not the most, like being quite a homogenous space. Yeah. Okay. And I am always curious. I mean, obviously to have conversations on a different podcast about inclusivity, like specifically intersectionality and equity and access in outdoor spaces. And I always feel like I'm always so grateful when folks show up to those spaces who don't look like everyone. But at the same time, I can only imagine like that feeling of being like, cool, well, I don't look like anyone here, and I'm just gonna run these like a couple days in the mountains. And then you meet someone like Stecco and you're like, oh my God, the world is okay. But I feel like there's just such a power in, I mean, similarly, I guess, too, in the environmental community, I know how homogenous that community is as well. And I feel like conservation, climate work, climate tech feels like it's very emergent space. But at the same time, I'm like, cool, it seems very homogenous. I mean, I'm just curious, like, how you feel about all of that, and like what I don't know, like the weight, or the, like, you've taken something on in both of these spaces. I'll just name it, that you're like, yeah, duh, but like, you don't need me to tell you this, but like, to tell other folks who are listening, like, I feel like you've really taken on this representation that you, like, when you show up to spaces, you are representing a community, and you're representing a big community sometimes, because I'm sure it's not, sadly, as of now, it's still like, again, if there's a person of color, quote unquote, who shows up to spaces, it's sort of like, I feel like those folks get lumped in together. But I'm just curious, like, how you feel across both trail running and then also environmental justice law work that you
Mhm.
do, like, every day, and how that feels to be in those spaces.
Yeah, oh my gosh, such a good question. And I have a very nuanced and complicated
Do
answer
it.
because there
Yes.
is such an overlap between the trail running space and the environmental justice space and
Interesting.
how things are just like how folks show up because like in the trail running you kind of have to care about the trails, right? You do have to have that ethos, and in environmental justice you do have to care about the environment. But then there are some things that get lost in
Hmm.
like you have to go deeper and really understand the intersectionality. And, you know, we always talk about like what's the climate solution? What's the like what is the answer? What is the like how do we fix it? And I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of like that race in Colorado or like
Yeah.
other trail races I've been at where, you're like one of you can count on your hand how many
Yeah.
like people of color, queer people are there, and it's just can feel really isolating, can feel really exhausting. However, what I always think the climate solution is, or the solution is listen to those who are directly impacted.
Hmm.
I always think leading with that leads to the solution because oftentimes we try to think of new things that replicate the same issues. But if we're not addressing the core issues, it's like, let me talk about climate first, and then I'll talk about
Yeah.
running.
Please.
And then it's like, before we even created society here, indigenous folks took care of their land. They had relationships with their land. And now it's like fast forwarding to our future, we think of folks like in Flint, Michigan who has not had clean water for like
Yeah.
years. And it's one of those things where it's like when we think of solutions and we think of where do we go, these voices cannot be lost. These voices actually are the ones that need to be centered, because if we are to fix anything or if we are to undo the harms that are caused, it is those voices that will be leading it. And
Hmm.
I think sometimes in the legal field, there is this ethos that, the lawyer is like a vertical sort of way
Mm-hmm.
of thinking of power. That should not be the case. It should be horizontal, or not even horizontal. It should be giving resources to those communities, giving voice to those communities, having them lead, because I think that is where we'll find the solution. That's where we've found the solution in moments where I've had cases where it's the first time that a person from the community serves as a witness on a case, and then they're able to speak to the direct impacts that these climate issues are having on them. And that leads the changes and leads the solutions. And I just think that that is so important. And it just requires, the microphone to be passed to different people. And I think the same in trail running. I recently was able to be a part of Camp We Run Long, which was this camp of all BIPOC trail runners. And we went to Colorado again. I guess I just love Colorado. And we all ran an ultra, but we also spent a couple days together in camp. And this was organized by the leaders of We Run Long, who are also all BIPOC trail runners. And it was just this beautiful moment of realizing that, hey, if you actually gave BIPOC trail runners the space and the resources to create something like this,
Hmm.
like folks will show up, folks will create community, folks will lead. It was I've never seen something like that in my life, and that just gave me
Wow.
so much hope. Like like even folks who were not part of the camp, who were at the race, just like saw the energy that we brought and saw just like the collective spirit of us like cheering every single person who ran through the finish line as though they were part of our
That's
family,
so
because like they
cool.
were at the end of the day, right? Like we were all doing this really hard thing together. And I think in both spaces, in our climate justice space, in trail running, if we want to make it more diverse and if we want to really prioritize a change, the solution is listening to the folks who are impacted.
Wow. I mean, hell yeah. Hell yeah. I'm like letting it wash over. Yes. And I think it sounds simple and easy. And I'm putting air quotes around that because it's not. I mean, it is, it isn't at the same time. It's sort of feels like it hasn't necessarily been taken up. Maybe that's the way I'll say it. Like it hasn't actually been practiced in that way.
And there's like difference between like tokenizing and just like inviting folks to the table versus actually listening to them and like prioritizing what they're saying and like and actually collaborating. Like there's definitely nuances there, which I think we have a long way to go, but there are moments of that like I'm like, wow, it can be done, and like there's hope out there for it to be done well and intentionally.
Totally. And I think there's also a really interesting space for both affinity groups or affinity spaces. Like this sounds like We Run Long is, which I am a big fan of We Run Long, so I do know this. But and then there's also moments where we want to bring everyone to the table. I mean, this is something that like I know we've talked about this before already in our early young friendship, but also a very strong friendship already. And also though the importance of just having space where folks can connect with and feel safe and feel seen and feel like there's a similarity, there's a inclusivity. And then there's also spaces where like it is important to sort of show up and represent, I suppose. But I'm also, I mean, as a white woman, I'm always so interested to hear folks who say like, yeah, that's not my job. Like not today. Like I'm not going to do that. It's not on, I don't want to put this on me and I'm like, no, right. Like it doesn't need to be. So I'm always quite in awe of folks, honestly, like yourself, who show up in these spaces that are like exceptionally white. And yet I'm also always trying to learn, both now someone who's in climate and trail running, like truly like both of us have kind of our 2 feet in these different worlds. I'm just always very curious how to kind of like not only do better myself, but then also to kind of nudge a lot of folks that look like me to be like, hey, there's a way we need to do this. And it's way more nuanced and it's not tokenistic, or ideally. I mean, again, there's plenty of tokenism in the trail space. So we don't need more of that. And the legal space, sure.
Both spaces for sure. Yep.
Totally. So, yeah, this is, I mean, I feel like we could talk about this for hours. This is very interesting to me. And we will return to this. I want to also turn though to the Speed Project, because this is something, so this is how we met. We can just say it. This is how we met. And
we did.
This is really exciting to be talking about because I know there's something upcoming for you that's on the horizon related to this. But I also wondered if you could talk about last year's Speed Project.
Of course.
And that kind of how that came to be and how that went. And then your upcoming potential endeavor, not potential, it's happening.
It's
TSP
happening.
2024. It's happening. Yeah. Do you want to talk about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so the Speed Project, for folks who don't know, the way I describe it is bananas because it doesn't even feel real, but it's basically a beautiful journey. It's a race. It's from LA to Las Vegas, and it can be done either solo or in a group. And solo has longer days to do it, and a group, I think, has shorter days to do it. But I ran it last year with a team called the Bodega Baddies, who I love. And Amanda Secco was also on that team. Hi, Secco again.
We're just going to basically call this episode.
We love Secco.
We love Exactly.
As we should. And yeah, it was actually in March. It feels like last year, but it was this year. Bananas.
Yeah.
But
confusing.
Ran it with this team of all women and non-binary athletes. And it was unlike anything I've ever done before because I do run ultras a bit, but I've never ran a like group ultra where we're, taking on this incredible distance, about like over 300 miles, and just figuring out not even just how to get there, but how to support each other on the way there. And it was just so beautiful. Like we've all had highs and lows. And it was one of those moments where community gets you through. Like that is like the
Hell
theme
yeah.
of like everything. It was just the moments where maybe one of us didn't want to do it, or moments where we needed a moment, moments where we needed to rest, moments where we needed to go. It was just like the constant underlying question was, how do we support each other through this? How do we get each other to this finish line? How do we represent ourselves out here? How do we show that we can be strong and badass and vulnerable and all of the things while dealing with really intense emotions, with exhaustion, with everything. It was like every emotion that you can think of, we felt. And
Name
like
an emotion, it was felt.
it was felt. It was there. It was like the
Yeah.
inside out characters of everything in that journey. And it was just so beautiful because it was like it felt so powerful of just like, damn, like it was an embodiment of folks realizing that self-doubt was out of the window, because it when the moment anyone felt self-doubt, they had someone to rely on, and it was just really beautiful. And this year, or rather next year, 2025, I guess in like literally a
What
few
year?
months.
What month? Yeah, exactly.
What is time is a concept?
What is time?
Yeah. I'm doing the solo version, which is a little bit bananas, and doing all of those miles by myself. But like I
also
said, nothing is actually done by yourself.
together.
Exactly. And the goal of this is like, of my solo journey, is to really bring in the aspect of community on solo. And like I really want the message to be exactly what I said before. Nothing we do in life is truly by ourselves. Like if I get to that finish line, it is because of my crew, it is because of the mission, it is because of every single person that has helped me along the way, and it is such a community effort. And we're going to be stopping by, me and my crew are stopping by different community orgs along the way and dropping off donations at shelters and schools. And we just really hope that brings awareness to the lands we run on and the neighborhoods we run through, because I do think that, I don't want that to get lost during the speed project, because I think it's really important to recognize that like it is such a ridiculous race. It is such a like long distance, but it is a run through different places and different lands. And I just want to be really conscious of that and acknowledge that and do what we can to give back to the lands that we run on and the communities that we run through and get to be part of. So I think that's really important. It's scary, but it's really exciting.
It's so exciting. And I think the thing too is like, as someone that knows a little bit about the Speed Project, I find it to be, at least traditionally or in the past, it's been very like, I mean, I'll just say it, like masculine, aggro. Like if anyone has a problem with how I'm describing this, they can write to me and be like, yo, it's changed. But like, but I mean, and when we were researching, because that was the other piece, was there was a couple folks and myself who were going to maybe do a film about the Bodega Baddies running last year. We didn't get that funded, sadly. But even in the research, I was like, okay, there's some groups who are more like female oriented, but we think that y'all were the first women and non-binary group to run it. Is that true?
I believe
Is that
so.
still okay?
I believe so, yeah.
And the next thing I wanted to ask was, do we know if there are any non-binary athletes aside from yourself planning to do it this spring?
Unsure. I'm in the I'm vaguely aware of the other solo runners who are doing it.
Okay.
I don't think there've been a non-binary athlete to have ran the solo before, and I'm not sure if there will be one this year besides me. But honestly, I hope there has been. I hope there will be. Like I hope like that's like the one thing that I wish that there was more access on. Like I just wish that there were more of us out there. And I think a huge part of me being out there is to show that we are there. We are running. We are out there, because I think I think also identifying as non-binary can be very complex for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think some people don't know if they want to identify publicly as non-binary too, for very valid
Totally.
reasons. And, places and spaces aren't always inclusionary and you feel very safe in. And I feel, again, because community is the core, I'm so blessed to have communities where I felt safe to be open about being non-binary and identifying as such and feeling safe and held in that. And I just, again, I hope that maybe there has been and I just don't know about it. And I hope that maybe there'll be other people towing the lines with me this year
Right.
or next year or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think just like what you see about the Speed Project doesn't always feel like it maybe is fully like um super inclusive. But I will say this year they started something called the Radical Equity Program where they are trying to be more
Oh,
mindful
cool.
of it. And I feel like that's been really beautiful. And I do think too, like we were talking about before, the difference between individualism and collectivism. I think,
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ultras, in a lot of trail running, it does feel very much like this is a very intense thing that I'm doing, and like it is very centered on like this is like conquering a race or like conquering the
Mm-hmm.
distance.
Mm.
And you know the ethos that I hope to bring is it's about the journey itself, and it's about the people you meet along, it's about the relationships you build along, it's about the communities you run through and the lands you run through. And I do hope that that collectivism allows more people to join in on this Speed Project the year after, and feel like it shifts how it's viewed or shifts sort of the overall ethos of it.
Totally. That's really interesting about this. See, I'm already learning new things, challenging my assumptions. Radical equity program or project in within the Speed Project sounds pretty amazing, actually. And I love the fact that you're bringing collective mindset, collective action, collectivity to your run is quite incredible, especially in a sport that is very much like one person gets from the start line to the finish line. And
Mm-hmm.
as a crew, I've been a crew member for a lot of runners at this point in my life, and it's definitely a team sport. Like,
It's
I'll say that.
100% a team sport.
It's a
Honestly,
team.
I think they're doing more than I'm doing. Yes, I'm physically moving, but
Sure.
like they are this beautiful like brains, like collective brain cell that's like, okay,
Yeah.
let's problem
Yeah.
solve. They are just amazing. Like I'm
Yeah.
like just iconic, and I like love everyone in my crew so much.
Oh my gosh, I know. Well, it's also clear because I know you've told me stories of like how you're inviting folks and everything, which we'll keep quiet on the podcast because we don't want to ruin the surprise. But it's still amazing. I mean, I've bonded so deeply with people on cruise. Like I've truly met like best friends. I've also
Yeah.
like still stayed in touch with people that way, or and just running in general. I think it's just such a wonderful way of like it's like there's nothing like being at an aid station at 3 a.m with someone. You really bond for life. It's pretty big
Literally
deal.
like throwing up,
Yeah.
using the bathroom,
Yeah.
like
Uh-huh.
bloody shoes, like you're just kind of like,
Yeah.
hey, so
You're
this
like, we're
is
gonna be friends forever. I can
yeah,
tell.
like sup,
Yeah, like cool. There's no hiding. Like I'm just here and you can see everything. Or if it's a runner that I'm crewing, I'm like, hey, I got you. We're good.
Yeah,
You don't need
yeah,
to worry. You don't need to worry about that. Amazing. Okay, well, this is so exciting to hear about the Speed Project solo. I know it's again, I want to call it something else because I'm like that word doesn't encompass like
yeah.
what you're
I
doing.
even
You know
feel
what I
like
mean?
weird calling it solo. That's why I call it the
Yeah.
Speedies Project, because I just
The
think it's like
CDs
silly,
project.
but
I
it's
love that.
like
Yeah.
because it does not feel solo to me. Like it
Right.
doesn't. Like
No, and you
even when
won't be.
I got into it, it just like automatically was like, cool, we're doing this. It wasn't ever like I'm doing this. It was like,
Yeah.
let's do this together. And I just like feel like, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited. It's gonna be a journey.
That's so exciting. Okay, I have to ask as someone that also has a full-time job, how do you do it all, which is such a like interview like slick interview question. How do you do it all? But I'm like, actually, how do you do this? Like what is your even and you can take this any way you want. If you're like, "Will I get up at 5 or whatever?"
LOL.
all the way to like, yeah, exactly. That's for me not a thing. But I mean like I'm just so curious how even like brain division wise? Like, are you running and thinking about a case? Are
Mm.
you like how does that go for you? Like, how does that live? Like, how do your two kind of sides, obviously also not just two parts of your life, there are like many parts of your life. I don't mean to be as dichotomous, but just like those two large buckets of your passions, like how do those come together for you?
That is so, so real, and a question I ask myself all the time. I'm always like, how? How? Like, but I do think a lot of it is they don't feel as separate to me as it might seem. And like I can give a very clear example. I was on this like 2-week long case in Florida, and as we were prepping, and again, this again shows collectivism is key because I'm working on a case team here. And I will just be like, hey, y'all, I'm going to hop out for 2 hours, go for this run. I'll be right back. And I just like run and I come back. And then the same thing with like with my running, and I like need to take a call. I literally will like be on a run and a case, something really important is hopping on my case. I'll just skirt to the side, make sure I handle that, make sure I take like I'm up to date. If I need to call my run, I'll call my run. Like it really is time on my feet, and I'll make up the distance like at another time. But there are decisions I have to make where, I just have to constantly understand which is the priority in the moment. And oftentimes it is my caseload, and I'll make up my runs when I make up my runs. But what's been really fascinating to me is like they feed each other. Like when I run, I'm like processing, like I feel like there's a clarity that comes into my brain about the types of arguments that I want to do, and the types of like the way or sometimes in the legal field, it can be very structured, but running allows me to be a little bit more creative because I can like step away, I can think, I can be in nature, and I could be like, wait, what if we argued this thing in a creative way? And it's just helpful. And then just being in court litigating these cases makes me feel like I'm protecting the trails that I run on. So it just like feels like, I don't know, they feel so connected even though they're so, so different.
No, I mean, part of the reason I want to talk to you is because I feel like there is a total connection with all of that, with everything that you do.
And what's great is both things tire me out, so I have to sleep.
Because otherwise you do strike me as someone who wouldn't sleep. Like just would be up thinking about how to save the world.
I am a serial napper. Like maybe I'm not always getting the like long sleep, but like I think I do have a superpower of like I can close my eyes and knock out. Like if I did that right now on this call, I could do it.
we could start a podcast that's just like, let's see how fast people can fall asleep. That's actually not a bad idea. Wow. Maybe not the most compelling audio content, but like I kind of like this.
It's just like 20 minutes of silence and someone goes, "Hey, are you asleep?"
Exactly. Wow, we could really go somewhere with this. I like it. Okay, again, so many questions always, but I wanted to kind of geek out with you about something that I don't really ask folks usually. Like this podcast is sort of not trying to be like, okay, so what do we do?
Right.
Because what I want to do is just show climate solutions, sure, but just even folks in this space, like working in this space, just to be like, hey, let's get some inspiration. Let's show like kind of great work that's happening, and hopefully we can feel a little more positive about things, not do doomsday, not do like, if like someone I talked to about this was like, well, don't do climate 101. Like I don't need to know the news, right? Like it, like I read it, right? I read the news, I know what's going on. So I feel like like I don't always ask this, but I'm kind of like, I don't want to ask you the like, well, okay, what can trail runners do? But like, I feel like, I wonder if you have thoughts on that topic generally in your overlap of these worlds. And I feel like obviously legal and law is so specific, but I'm just curious, like,
1,000%.
Go for it.
No, this is great because it's like I feel like I can't, and this is one thing that's really important to know. I can't turn my brain off. Like I feel like like it's like, yes, I have a lot of hats, but I don't feel like I ever take a hat off. It's like I'm wearing them simultaneously, which
like multiple hats.
Could be good, could be good, could be bad. But like I would just say a big advice for trail runners is to educate yourself. Like, find out what lands you're running on. If there is like, if it's on an indigenous land that, you know, usually sometimes there can be nonprofits tied to the land or other things that, and again, it's what they need. So if they have a website, if they have like people to reach out to, figuring out if there's like any things you can do to support them in the ways that they need it. I think too, just being really conscious of like the trails that you use. A lot of people will, be like, oh, let me like skirt around or like not actually follow the trail, which actually does a lot of harm to the fauna and like actual stuff around it. And the people who actually work on maintaining the trails don't love that because they've carved out a trail for a reason. And but that's just like things that people don't realize when they're trail running because they're tired, they're exhausted, they're like, let me just get there. That like, I just think doing your research beforehand goes such a long way, because then you could know like how to be thoughtful about getting involved and about helping and not just like showing up. And I also think it helps folks be intentional when they're in the moment, because it like if you know the trails you're running on, if you know the land you're on, while you're there, it's just so much more magical and just is so much more meaningful. Like, what birds are there? What animals could you see on course? Like, it's just like one of those things where you're like, holy moly, I'm so present in this world right now. And yeah, it can be an internal beautiful thing. It can be an external beautiful thing of like, who do you connect with? But yeah, just like that basic thing can go a long way.
Knowledge and research. Yeah, and part of the premise of this whole project, these conversations where the climate things are in general, is the idea that talking about climate change can actually be one of the, or has shown to be like one of the best climate solutions. So it's just kind of like, let's have some dialogue. Like maybe a group, it's not necessarily about like, well, did you know that this trail was impacted by like, insert really bad weather event here kind of thing. That's important too. But I love what you said about like, what birds might we see? What animals might we encounter? Like, just sort of knowledge about like the beauty of the area or the biodiversity of the natural region. Like, that's so cool. Just as, again, like a solutions oriented endeavor to be more like positive thinking about like what's here and how can then that leads to like how can we preserve it ideally.
Exactly. And it's also like when you are looking at animals in the area, you can also see like how the populations have changed throughout the years or grown, like, and it like I know that there's climate deniers out there, which I just like for the speed project last year, it literally hailed in Death Valley. Like how do it's I can't even process like the trails that we will be running on will be changing if we don't take care of the environment. And that's not even to just like doomsday. It's just to like have accountability as like to the thing that we love doing is also a thing that we should protect and take care of.
Totally agree. Okay, looking at time, I have one more question for you before the last question. So basically 2 questions.
I love it.
But I have to ask you about stand-up comedy. This is
gonna
be a hard turn. I know. I love it. I did some research on you, my friend.
Hello.
And here we go. This is what I wanted. Is basically, can you do your tight 5? Can you do a 5-minute routine?
And a 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Yeah. I would love to hear more about, is this part of your life?
Oh my God,
what is this small line that I read online about you? Yes, please tell me more.
Wow. I love, see, when I said do your research, you're like, you are actively doing it. This is amazing. Like,
I did it already.
Look at that.
Exhibit A.
This is a star student. No, which is really funny because I also feel like stand-up comedy also mirrors a lot of the things that we've been talking about the space itself has not always been inclusive and is doing a lot of work to be more inclusive now, but also the idea of punching up versus punching down. For those who don't know that, like, punching up means your jokes are towards things that are more privileged, or like you like basically don't punch down, because punching down is making fun of folks who are less privileged and honestly is just not funny. Like, and it can feel offensive, it can feel really exclusionary, it can feel just and unfortunately a lot of historical comedy and like how comedy was a lot of punching down in the past, and I think there has been movements to punching up more and just having more thoughtful comedy. And I started stand up around 2016, which is bananas to even say, and I loved it. However, in that moment, especially in New York, I just felt like the scene itself was not very diverse and not very thoughtful in their comedy. And then I re-entered the comedy space last year doing a show with women stand-up in New York who basically creates cohorts of stand-up comedians who are identified as women and non-binary, and did a show with them, and it was really fun. And I believe humor is how we might be getting through some really tough times and maybe in some tough 4 years. And I've just been really excited on writing a lot, and we'll be performing in March at New York's Knockout Festival.
Wait, what? Okay, I didn't know that. That's so
hello.
cool.
I thought, okay,
Hello?
maybe I thought that was a segue of like why you were asking.
No, that's
LOL.
okay. Well, I wish I could be like, yes, I already knew this, but no, I did not. That's so exciting. I'm so glad I asked about this.
But
Okay.
stand up it's one of those things where it's like you can talk about really important things and it feels accessible for people because people want to laugh and people want to have these moments of like release. And I love stand up because the stand up that I do combines that release with like thought and also like deep thinking of like how we as people can be better.
I love this, and as a huge fan of stand-up comedy, that's why I asked, because I just like love the comedy space. I don't do it. I am a consumer of comedy. Actually, funny story, I have a friend who still actually he's doing quite well in comedy these days, but he used to put me next to the camera, like operate the camera, because I would laugh so loudly at jokes. So it would make it seem, he was like, you have a loud laugh and you laugh at everything, you will sit next to the camera.
So are you doing anything in March?
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm trying to say, Heemz, is that I'm coming to New York for this.
Put you right in front.
Well, I didn't know, and as such a fan, I guess I'm not really, because I didn't even know about like punching up, punching down. That's so interesting. And I think is really makes a lot of sense with like the comedy I've seen of late, where it is kind of like making folks think and challenging assumptions and kind of coming in, especially in relation to, it doesn't have to be environment, but any of these kind of broader concepts that audiences might not necessarily expect to like think through at a show. But that has happened to me as someone who's attended shows. So that's really interesting. I didn't know about that concept. I'm learning so much. Okay. Lastly, because we could talk for many more hours, gonna wrap it up. But wanted to ask you the question of that I ask all of the guests on this. What is your favorite climate solution that is not your own? And you can take that in many ways, because obviously you work at a very specific organization. It could be another organization. You work in a specific area. It could be another thing. I'm just curious, like, honestly, more to give the audience a sense of like, oh, I should go look that up, or like, oh, I didn't know about this. You know, what is something that's exciting you right now in this space as a solutions-oriented practice?
Okay. I love this. And this is also, I feel like it leaves with a little bit of like a hopeful look towards the future.
That's the idea.
I'll see how the brain is braining.
Love it.
And like I mentioned before, I think the core of climate solutions is listening to folks directly impacted. I also think, and this is like as a tangible thing that folks can take away of like what they could do, look what climate organizations are in your area and what they're doing. Because I think it is so easy to just like feel like things are out of our hands and that we like tangible things can't be done, but you will be so surprised by what might just be around the corner from you, what might be accessible to you. And if there's nothing around you, what are like things in your area that you're noticing? Is it pollution based? Is it like Are you noticing like the trees dying? Are you noticing different access issues? Are you noticing like what are things that might seem small and might seem doable around you that you can tap into your community and get help with? Like there's community gardens, there's, libraries that just like you could have a book club where you're like understanding more about your environments and understanding more about your solutions. And one thing about what we're going through is we can just learn a lot from history, learn a lot from the communities that came before us, learn a lot from the folks who've taken care of the land. And people are out there doing amazing work and doing amazing things. And just I'm so glad you have this podcast highlighting some of the things people are doing. But even in my career as an environmental lawyer, they're like every day I'm learning about a new org that's like a community-based org that's doing something amazing. And that's what brings me hope. And that's what's like, wow, this work means something and is worth it. And it's worth to keep going because folks have been doing it for so long and folks are continuing to do it. And I just think also understanding that environmental stuff is so intersectional with other stuff too, that like if you're not doing something that's directly environmental or climate so like oriented, it could have a tangential impact that does because things are intersectional. So wherever your heart takes you, again, nothing is done by ourselves. It will always be done in community. See what's around you, and yeah, do your research.
I love these messages.
A lot of themes
so great.
are pulling.
All of these could just be like separate bullet points or quotes on a wall, exactly saying, Heemz, thank you so much for talking to me. This was such a joyful time, especially as we mentioned, there was like quite a rush and delay before getting to this project on my side. So then I came in being like, oh, I feel at once hopeful and joyful and upbeat, as well as like very grounded and calm. So thank you for bringing all of that energy. And thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, and thank you for asking such thoughtful questions. It also leaves me with a lot of like hope, and I think also, yeah, groundedness is such a good word. So thank you.
Absolutely. I can't wait for more collaboration in the future.